So, welcome to the latest episode of the Growth Ripples podcast. Today, it's my absolute pleasure to be joined by Nicole Karagiannis. Thank you so much, Nicole, for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. It's such a pleasure to see you again.
Yeah, you too. And we were just saying for those listening that we actually worked together in one of the biggest banks of Australia about 15 years ago in the GFC. So we've seen our fair share of economic uncertainty. So it's great to reconnect and then have you on the show, given that we've been in touch over the years, but certainly not as much as we used to be 15 years ago.
Yes, so good to be reunited. And memories, hey, 15 years ago. It's gone by so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, just want to say, I'm loving the poster at the background. I know that's your, not yours, but similarly, like, this isn't my Lego in the background either. I think it's always nice to have a bit of personality to the background. So, thanks for joining us from your child's bedroom.
Shout out to Connie. This is Connie's taste. She loves the show Friends. So I know she'll be listening when this drops on Spotify. So thanks, Connie, for providing your bedroom for
Yeah,
this
great taste,
podcast.
Connie. I also like Birds of Prey, and I was a big fan of Friends back in the day. So
Yeah.
thank you. So as I mentioned, Nicole and I worked together about 15 years ago in banking, and we've had quite a varied career in HR. And Nicole, it's been a pleasure to kind of watch your career develop over the years. You've worked in healthcare, banking, public sector, you name it, you've sort of been there and really just been flourishing from what I can see. You're a mentor, you're a coach, you're also the Chief People and Culture Officer at Harrison AI. And what really drew me to welcome you on the show and wanting you to be on this podcast was that particular post that you had on LinkedIn back on International Women's Day. And just to remind you, if you've forgotten about the post, you talked about, obviously it's great that we have something for women and recognizing that, but also the journey that you've been on, and you and your sister, if I recall correctly, you're the first in your family, the first females in your family to actually go all the way through, get tertiary educated, and now you're both raising six strong women. So I'd love to hear more about that journey and your family's journey, if we could start maybe from that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for reminding me. I felt like it was a strong message I needed to put out there that day. Yes, I mean, we migrated to Australia, my parents, my sister, and my two brothers in 2000. And so have been here for 23 years, which have been an amazing opportunity, and ever so grateful for that. I think through that, the realization that my growing up in a village in Lebanon, education is something that my parents didn't have access to, and my father went on to do that later in life and do a degree in his 30s. And I remember being a child and hearing him say to me, learning is a lifelong journey. We'll be learning till the day we die. And so I always repeat that, and I'm very inspired by both him and my mom in terms of who they are as people. My sister and I both attended university as the first females, the first two women to do that in my family. So I did my bachelor's in human resources and management in Australia, and my sister studied at UTS for her architecture career. And so she's the creative one. She's good with numbers. I'm good with words, in case you're trying to work out who's who. And yeah, between us, we have 7 kids, 6 of whom are women. And that was the inspiration. So I have my 3, and she has her 3. And the joke is we have our half a dozen. And the job here is to work doing all these things in terms of mentoring, coaching, the PNC role. My goal here is to inspire them. And really, my one message is you can be whoever you want, whatever you want. Don't let one identity define you, and don't let any boundaries get in the way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that inspiration that you talk about, coming from family. I'd love to hear a bit more about, you talked about not having the opportunity in Lebanon, like your family not having that there. What changed coming into Australia, and how did they sort of your family support you and your sister coming into that sort of different education sort of sphere, if you like?
Yeah, my parents worked really hard to make sure we had access to um, good school education in Lebanon. So it's been a bit of a day one privilege for us, something that they didn't have. They couldn't afford. They didn't even have the transportation to leave the village to get to primary or secondary school and so on. So for us, we're very mindful that they had to work really hard to financially be able to afford that. And then coming into Australia, realizing as we were becoming adults, it was up to us to take that initiative. And my parents have always raised independent people, not ones that were forced to do anything out of their own accord. And so having that, what I call grit
Mm.
and hard work and that ethos around, there are so many million other people who would wish had the opportunity to become citizens of this great country. This
Mm.
is not something that you can afford to waste.
Yeah.
And so from there, we worked really hard to finish, in my case, high school. And my brother's case finished high school as well, and then moved on. In the case of my sister and I, moved on to find the right university with the right degree. And I mean, back then I didn't even know what human resources was,
Yeah.
and that even existed as a job. I thought all that meant was you just get to talk to people all day. I thought, oh, that sounds like fun. I'm a good talker.
Yeah.
Why not? It
Yeah.
turns out there was so much more to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I remember back, 2008, I think it was, we were there in the team doing quite a bit of case investigation work, advising managers and what have you. So what was it that drew you? First of all, it sounded like you wanted to work with people, which is a great start. But then what led you to keep pursuing that career in HR, starting, in the banks that you started working in?
Yeah, I think I did a few retail casual gigs along the way in high school. So I was working from the age of 15. And I think very earlier on, it started to dawn on me the importance of management and leadership and the impact that people have on each other.
Mm.
So that was for me the connection that human resources meant that you get to work with managers and that you get to shape and hopefully for the better influence who they are as leaders, which then that scales to their teams. So I have a super, super strong passion around leadership and coaching
Mm.
to the point that I did a master's in leadership in 2019 in the middle of lockdown and having a baby because why not?
Wow.
And so for me, that was the attraction, and that was through a couple of really tangible situations where I was experiencing great management and leadership and what good looks like. Especially when you're an impressionable teenager and these moments stay with you. I mean, I have a really good memory
Mm.
and I have a lot of empathy. So I used to feel and remember every little interaction and go home and analyze it. I loved studying people and how their behavior impacted on me positively or otherwise. And I experienced a few negative leadership examples and I thought
Mm.
I can shape how that can be done better.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, that we can learn from when people are doing it great, but I think we can also learn sometimes even more from those that aren't doing it well and going, well, I'm not going to be a leader like that, and then this is how I'm going to shift and change how I sort of present myself, how I lead the people around me.
Absolutely. The what not to do list is
Yeah.
so powerful.
And how does that play out in your coaching? Because I know you do a lot of coaching and mentoring. How do you see that playing out in terms of your experiences that you've had across these years of being in HR?
It's given me a number of perspectives. I think that fine line between coaching someone but not having had the lived experience
Mm.
or coaching someone to help them unlock their own potential because you come to the conversation from a place of respect and trust and absolute belief that they have the goods.
Mm.
I mean, you're not working magic as a coach. You're not going to be um, transforming people overnight unless they are driving that themselves and from within. So,
Mm.
from an HR point of view, the work that I did earlier on around understanding people through HR processes such as investigations or performance management or motivation, working out what makes people tick and what gets them out of bed. Did that for so many years in HR, and that's translated to a new level of appreciation for how complex humans are,
Mm.
um, and how really the job of a coach is to help them simplify and delayer everything that's going on internally for them to get to that really gold bit of nugget, if you like, inside of them that they're going to hold on to and kind of sprint from there into whatever great thing they're about to do. I mean, I sound like a psychologist. I'm not. That's maybe one day.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just so fascinating. Love it so much.
Absolutely. I mean, that delayering that you talk about, I mean, it's such an important part I find in coaching as well around, and sometimes we go back to people's childhoods and, you know, the things that have happened and therefore the patterns that play out. I mean, I'm curious in your experience, like with how your coaching has evolved or the people that you're coaching, how they've evolved since COVID, because, you know, this has been an unprecedented challenge for us in with lockdowns and social isolation. How has that played out in your coaching with the people and the leaders that you work with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd love to hear how it's played out in your coaching as well, Jan, because I think I have a few things to learn from you in terms of that pre-post COVID. For me, a couple of things: getting at a superficial level, getting comfortable with virtual coaching, and
Mm,
taking your practice from being that pre-COVID, that face-to-face, in-person, watching the body language from head to toe, analyzing it, asking coaches, coachees or clients to sit down, stand up, move around, change chairs, whatever methodology you have, and being able to play with your physical space, that turned into a whole new experience in this new hybrid slash virtual world, and
mm,
being able to say, please trust me through the screen. You can
mm,
only see my face, I can only see yours. I'm going to create psychological safety and trust and listen to you actively and do all of the above through a screen. Like
mm,
it's at that sort of level. That's a huge shift. um, in terms of how people have been coping, to go back to your question around how people have been coping with the pandemic and COVID and how that comes through coaching,
mm,
I think if I can sum it up by saying that it's been a lot about self discovery and
mm,
self connection and going back to that inner child. Because at a time of uncertainty where we're all equal, I mean, if you couldn't find toilet paper, it didn't matter how rich or how poor you were, you just
mm,
couldn't get toilet paper. Or on a more serious level, if you were living with the fear of and the debate of whether to send your child to childcare or keep them at
mm,
home, all of a sudden it doesn't matter whether you had the means to that end. We all
mm.
stopped getting access to these things at the same time.
Yeah.
And so wrestling with, this is outside of my control and something like money can't fix for me, relatives can't fix for me, I can't see my family, like all of these bits that are outside of my control. What does that
Mm,
mean for me as a
mm.
person, and how do I deal with what I can
Yeah.
and let go of what I can't?
Yeah, I think that's a great insight there that you just shared. I mean, that equalizer that we're all experiencing this one thing, and how that shows up for us or what that triggers within us may be different depending on the experiences that we've had, both in childhood and in adulthood. The other thing that I've noticed in the leaders that I've worked with through this period, and curious if you found the same, is, you know, in leadership, we're often so focused on the people that we're leading, and we're so focused often about how do we do the best for the team, bring out the best in the people around us, care for them, and what have you. But I think a lot of people, unfortunately, and I think maybe I was a little bit guilty of this as well, forgetting to look after oneself and often losing ourselves in what everything else is going on around us and trying to provide for, maybe it's the family, provide for the team, and stopping and just going, actually, am I doing enough for myself? Am I taking care of myself? Because it's so hard in order to support others if we're not feeling supported ourselves. Is that something that you've found as well in your work?
I did on two levels, in terms of the leaders and reminding them to look after themselves. And it's so easy to sit here and go, not me, I've got it all worked out. It's about the people I was coaching and their self care and
Mm-hmm.
their, them leading from a full cup. But of course, that was for me. That was the case for me as well.
Mm,
Um, I mean, to unpack that a little bit, I'd love to sit here and go, I've worked out my boundaries, I've worked out my self care, and I'm very fortunate in terms of my husband is a great mentor and a great reality check.
Mm,
And so many years ago, when we weren't even married yet, so that's a very long time ago, I I was in a very demanding role, and he kind of just sat me down and said, measuring success by how many emails you respond to on a Saturday night
mm,
is not how one lives their life.
mm.
So get your stuff together. I was about to say a bad word. Um, get your stuff together. And so I did that before having, my two younger kids. So I sorted myself out to a degree, not
Mm,
completely. There's no such thing as done,
yeah.
before I entered this whole new realm of motherhood, pandemic,
Mm,
studying, working, all of the above at one go. So I feel like I had a good wake up call a lot earlier
yeah.
than others did. But of course, that was questioned and shaken to its core during the pandemic, as well. And
Mm,
partly because I chose to keep busy so I can be distracted.
yeah.
But I was being busy with the wrong busy, not the right busy.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that whole piece about coming back to what are our measures of success. And it can be so easy to get caught up with external measures of success or what we think is right, whether it's answering emails, hitting certain KPIs, making sure you look good in front of the boss. And then I find, I think we both had that journey where we're trying to do what we think is right. And sometimes
Mm.
we're living up to someone else's expectations, or maybe not even their other expectations. It's the ones we think we should have. But continuously asking ourselves, and it's something we have to come back to regularly, like, actually, am I living by my own values, by my own measures of success? Because if we only look at the external or what we think others want from us, we're unlikely to ever really truly fulfill ourselves, or as you said, fill up our cup.
That's so deep, Jan. I mean, that's so true. I
Mm.
love it.
Mm.
Absolutely love it.
One thing I'd love to explore a bit more, Nicole, because I'm just conscious of time, but I mean, I'm sure we could talk for hours, is the vulnerability that you show in lots of different mediums. And, I'm always in awe of that, the strength that you show in your posts, but also in some of the things that you're doing within the organizations you work with. And you just touched on, before we hit the record button, something that you had published, or was it a year or two ago? Is that right?
Yeah.
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 Would you be happy to share a bit about that for those that are watching and listening at home?
Absolutely. Absolutely happy to share. And I think it's important to share. So, about a year ago, at Harrison.ai, we launched our Becoming a Parent program, which is our parental leave policy, but it was so much more, and it is so much more than leave. It's 5 pillars in general: supporting with IVF, supporting with miscarriage and pregnancy loss, and the list goes on, and all the way to school readiness,
Mm,
leave, and something we're very proud and passionate about and very proud of. In At the time when we launched it externally, the story ended up in the Australian and the Daily Telegraph,
mm,
and it was through that medium that I shared my own story around miscarriage and having gone through a silent miscarriage and going through a D&C back in 2016, before having Sophia and Georgia. So, yeah, I was sharing about how important it is as a leader to be comfortable in your own skin and to
mm,
be vulnerable, because the reactions that this story got, in terms of people reaching out and saying, I also went through this thing and I also have a private life and I didn't tell anyone at the time,
mm,
but now I'm strong enough to tell someone. It was it was astounding in terms of how many people were suffering silently.
mm,
And I mean, there are great organizations out there like the Pink Elephants, and others who do amazing work to support men and women,
mm,
to grieve such a big loss. And I
mm.
thought, having my own tiny voice added to that, as a result of this, huge loss from a number of years ago now, was, yeah, such a privilege, and to be
Mm.
able to do something like this.
Yeah, that's so powerful for you to share that. I mean, like you said, I'm sure that allowed or gave permission to a lot of other people to come forth and share what's happened for them. One question, I guess, for those that don't know, when you talked about silent miscarriage, what does that specifically mean, if people aren't aware of the terminology?
Yeah, absolutely. And I before I answer that, for the people listening, uh, if you're triggered by this, please tune in to that and seek the support that you need.
Mm,
And if you are triggered, then you are going through a loss, and I'm so sorry for your loss. And I should have said that at the beginning. My apologies to those listening. For me, silent miscarriage, to go back to the question, silent miscarriage is one when it occurs internally. So it hasn't, you don't know unless you've gone and done an ultrasound and there's no heartbeat. In my case, there was no signs
Mm,
externally that I was going through a miscarriage. No, no, I
mm,
wasn't going through any pain or any blood loss, for example, or anything of that nature. It was go to a normal ultrasound. There's no heartbeat, and I remember a big red X. I mean, this is why there's so much we can improve on in healthcare.
mm,
It was this big confronting red X coming up on the side on the screen, and the poor sonographer not knowing how to deal with it. It was like, I'm sorry, there's no heartbeat. Here's the ultrasound. Go speak to your GP about what happens now.
oh wow. Mm,
And I'm sure they were doing their job,
mm,
but it was just handled with not a lot of emotion,
yeah.
and same with the GP and so on. I mean, that's a whole different podcast on its own. But
Mm,
yeah, that was
mm.
the experience that I had.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, both in the papers and obviously within your own organization. I mean, I'm sure that's helped a lot of people. And like you said, if people are getting triggered by any of the things that we've talked about, I mean, please do seek help. A lot of organizations have EAP, but there's obviously a lot of resources online as well that you can access for free. Nicole, I mean, it's a bit of a somber sort of end to it, but I think it's also such an uplifting and amazing way to turn something that, is obviously a very challenging experience for you into something that, can hopefully inspire others to come forth. Maybe one last question before we close up. Particularly for leaders that perhaps haven't had those kind of experiences before, whether they're male, female, or otherwise, how can they best support um, individuals going through that, the loss of potential family members in that sort of scenario? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
You've just reminded me of I think it was a poem or a post, something I shared. I must have shared on my personal social media platforms, must be Instagram. It was along the lines of, when someone is grieving, look them in the eye.
Mm,
I don't remember the rest of it. I wish I did, and maybe I'll send it to you, and you can share it afterwards. But that's the that's really what's at the core of it.
mm,
I mean, I can sit here and talk about empathy versus sympathy, and apathy and so on. Everyone should have that one worked out by now. I don't need to go there, and if you don't have it worked out, please Google it, and or speak to someone about the importance of having compassion and empathy,
mm,
rather than extending yourself in a sympathetic way, or an unemotional way. But for me, the biggest thing that our people leaders need to lean into is to look that grief in the eye.
mm,
And that comes back to that whole, lead from a cup that is full. Because
mm,
if that grief triggers you, then you're not there supporting that person, which is why it's linking back it to, it's so important that you look after yourself if you're looking after people. um, and so what that means, and when I say, look grief in the eye, is show up, be present, ask how someone is feeling. Don't avoid them because it feels awkward or you don't know what the right thing to say is.
mm,
Just be there and say things like, I don't know what the right thing to say is. What would you like me to say?
mm,
Or what does support look like for you right now? That is the most powerful way you can lead,
mm,
is simply by asking, what do you want, rather than assuming what I want,
mm,
what your people want, or assuming how things are done in your culture or in your family, that that's the right way to treat somebody. Just say, I don't know,
mm,
but I'm here.
mm.
What does this support look like?
Yeah.
And it could be, come back and ask me tomorrow,
Mm,
sit here with me and have a cry. I mean, I don't know,
mm,
but whatever it is, be brave to lean into it.
mm.
But my biggest thing is, look grief in the eye.
Yeah, I mean, that's beautiful, perfect practical advice. What I really loved about it is it's also demonstrating vulnerability. So, so easy to kind of avoid those tough conversations. And often we don't know what to say, but even just saying that out loud and saying, look, I don't know what the right thing is here, but I'm here for you. I want to support how best I can. You tell me how I can support you. And even if you don't know, that's okay too. I think that's, you know, part of what it means to be a coach, what it means to be a mentor at times, and what it means to be a leader for those in your life that you want to help support. So, Nicole, I mean, thank you so much. It's been a powerful podcast, and I really enjoyed having you. And hopefully, you can come on again in the future. And look forward to continuing to see all the great waves that you're making in your career and at Harrison AI.
More than happy to. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank,
So good to see you again.
yeah, thanks, Nicole.